What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be ranking my hardest platinum trophies that I've earned so far. Let's get into it. So what I've done is I've gone through all 155 of my platinum trophies that I've earned so far, and I've handpicked 25 platinum trophies that I personally thought were really hard to get. And we're going to be ranking these platinum trophies in the following order. Tough but fair. Tough but fair, I think, is pretty straightforward. It's a challenging platinum trophy, but it's totally achievable. It is pretty fair with what it asks you to do. Pretty straightforward. The Betrayal. The Betrayal is a little less obvious. The Betrayal are platinum trophies that I thought were going to be pretty easy to get, either by the type of game that it was, maybe it was a little bit more childish, cartoony looking from the outside, but it ended up being sort of harder than I thought. Brutal. So pretty straightforward here as well. These were pretty taxing on me personally. You know, these were mentally exhausting and a little bit more tedious than I would have liked, but they're still pretty doable. Nothing too crazy there. Nightmare Fuel. So this is a tier above Brutal. These are even more challenging platinum trophies, and in some cases I've had nightmares, actual dreams about these platinum trophies being such a difficult time. Finally, we have Satan's Butthole. So this is pretty straightforward. Satan's Butthole, these are the cream of the crop, the hardest trophies that I've earned. They have been either pretty tedious or grindy or just overall, in some instances, not very fun, in my opinion. Before we actually start with the official ranking today, if you do want to see more stuff like this, maybe consider subscribing. And if you are a returning viewer to this channel, I super appreciate you guys coming back for even more content like this. But without further ado, y'all, let's actually get these games ranked. We got a lot to go through here, and I'm going to start things off with BioShock here. Now, BioShock, this is the PlayStation 3 version. This is not like the remastered edition on PS4, and I know there's some exploits on that, so didn't really have any exploits for this on PS3, and I was also going off of the digital version, so couldn't really revert to an older version of the game to exploit anything. So this was pretty tricky, right? This was pretty hard for me. Having said that, though, I think this is tough but fair. There are plenty of challenging aspects to BioShock, the original BioShock on PS3. The hardest, without a doubt, is beating the game on the hardest difficulty without using a Vita chamber. You really just have to be saving constantly. You have to be using environmental, plasmid effects on these slicers. It's a lot more environmental-based kills than it was for like shooting, just because the resources were so finite that was the most challenging aspect of this platinum trophy, but everything else is pretty doable, I think. Next here, I'm going to grab randomly is Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Now this, I want to make a distinction here. This is the Uncharted Drake's Fortune remaster on the Nathan Drake collection. So this is the more recent edition of Uncharted Drake's Fortune, which includes Brutal mode, and as well as some other, time trial based trophies and a couple things like that. And so having said that, I would honestly put this guy into the Betrayal, mainly because I hold the platinum trophy in every single Uncharted game. That includes 1 to 3, 4, Lost Legacy, pretty much, Golden Abyss, I forgot about that one. But I have the platinum trophy in every single Uncharted, and so when I was replaying the Nathan Drake collection and doing Uncharted, the remastered edition, it was actually a little bit more hard. It was harder than I remembered it being. It was a little more challenging. Brutal mode kind of kicked my butt, or crushing mode kicked my butt as well. Like, there were just certain things that I didn't remember it being as hard with this one. And so when I went back into the first Uncharted, I was rudely awoken to the fact that this was kicking my butt, and it was actually pretty challenging. Next here is a recent game. This is Infamous on the PlayStation 3. Can I just say, Sony, what the heck, man? Where are the Infamous games? Like, a lot of people haven't played them, and they're pretty good. I think even they hold up to today's standards. And I did platinum this recently in 2023. So this is kind of fresh in my mind. And honestly, this is another tough but fair guy right here, and right next to BioShock. And so Infamous is cool because there are a handful of it's an open world superhero game, so there's plenty of pretty easy trophies, just completing the story, doing all the good choices, all the bad choices. That stuff's pretty straightforward. The only trophy that will pose a problem is the hard difficulty playthrough. There are some sequences in the back half of this game that are pretty challenging, and so that's sort of where most of the difficulty for this trophy list is going to come in. But aside from that, everything else is super doable, very fun. And like I said, Sony, come on, man, get those Infamous games on a current gen console. Alrighty, so next here we've got our first contender in Satan's Butthole. This is Enter the Gungeon. This game, my God, this game, first of all, I never thought I was going to get the platinum trophy in Enter the Gungeon. It was one of those things where I started playing this game with my partner, and she asked me, oh, what's the platinum trophy look like for this game? And I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's really hard. I don't even want to bother with it. but the fact that she was even thinking about the platinum trophy, because she knows how much I go into depth with these things, it kind of drove me to this point where I'm like, I need to get this platinum, because now I'm like, maybe I can do this, maybe I can get this platinum trophy. Enter the Gungeon is definitely one of the hardest platinum trophies that I've ever gone for. It is a roguelike, it is a bullet hell game, and there's just a lot of RNG to this trophy list. Now, obviously there's tons of skill involved to beating the game, not getting hit by any of the bosses in one run. So if you get hit by a single boss during any boss fight, and there's 5 of them, you basically have to restart your entire run. It's really hard, and it's all, skill-based, and then there's also some luck-based trophies, but the RNG is what makes me hate this trophy so much. There's a lot of instances where you have to encounter these NPC characters, but they only appear randomly, so you have to basically do a bunch of runs until they show up, and then complete their quest, and if you fail their quest, you have to restart your runs and hope that you run into them again. It is very luck-dependent in some situations, but it's also heavily skill-dependent. Easily one of the hardest platinum trophies. I would rank this as like a 9 out of 10, or it's very hard for me personally. But yeah, this is the first contender here in the Satan's Butthole category. It is Enter the Gungeon. Next here, we're going to be taking a look at Dead Space. This is, again, want to make a note here, this is not the remake. This is the original Dead Space on PS3. And so I've heard that the remake is a little bit easier in terms of its platinum trophy. This is just the PlayStation 3 version. And I will say that I'm going to put this in brutal, to be honest. For me, this was a pretty challenging platinum trophy, mainly because not only do you have to beat the game, right, on like the regular difficulties, which can be challenging, but you have to beat the game with only the plasma cutter, which isn't that bad. Actually, the plasma cutter is my favorite, like most reliable weapon in all of Dead Space. So that run's not that bad. The hardest run though is beating the game on the hardest difficulty, and resources are finite. You have less just stasis, kinesis packs. There's just like less of everything in this game. There's less currency as well. That's easily like one of the hardest parts of this trophy list, is going for that hard difficulty run. Now you can combine your hard difficulty run with the plasma cutter run, which actually I think works out better because you can just sell all of your resources that you get for other weapons and other ammunition types. You can just sell all that stuff and dump a bunch of money into your plasma cutter. And that makes things a little bit easier because you don't have to have like 5 guns that you have to manage ammo for. But even doing that, even that approach isn't the easiest thing in the world. So I think that's why Dead Space goes into brutal for me personally. Okay, now I did not plan this, but the next one here is the Callisto Protocol. But yeah, Callisto Protocol, honestly, I think when I first started playing this game, I probably would have put it alongside Dead Space in brutal. However, there are some accessibility settings that make the clunky combat way less annoying. And so for that reason, I'm actually going to put this in the Betrayal. I thought this was going to be sort of what I expected it to be, but it ended up being a little bit harder because the combat was so bad. I did not like the combat. I really didn't like the combat. I've mentioned it in other videos as well, but I think most of the difficulty for me was coming from the combat, and I didn't expect it to be that, challenging. Now, if you turn on the accessibility settings to auto dodge, it really takes a lot of the annoyance out of the combat encounters in that game, and by extension kind of makes things a little bit easier. And so I'm going to put it in the Betrayal just because of the fact that, again, I thought it was going to be a little bit easier than what it was, and most of the annoyances that I had faced were due to the combat and really less about the inherent difficulty of this game. So that's kind of why I think it maybe belongs in the Betrayal as opposed to like some of the other games that we'll see. All right, next here is Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 3 is going to go into tough but fair. I think that this game in particular, it's pretty short. You can beat it in like 4 hours. If you're really speed running through the game, I think you can beat it in like 2 hours, something like that. And this actually brings me into the harder trophies that you'll have to do. So for Resident Evil 3, you'll have to do your normal playthrough, get all the collectibles, pretty straightforward. Then you have to do the speed run challenges, and then beating the game on the, completing the game with a certain ranking. I think it's like S tier or something like that, which just means you have to beat it within a certain amount of time. And things like that. The hard difficulty playthrough, the speedrun playthrough, those are all pretty challenging, but if you follow guides, if you prepare yourself enough for the speedrun challenge and the hard difficulty playthrough, it's really not too terrible. And so that's kind of why I think it goes into tough but fair. There are plenty of challenging aspects to this trophy list, but they're super achievable, and by far not some of the hardest stuff that we'll see on this ranking as well. Speaking of which, I swear these are all randomly ordered, so I can't believe that this is next. This is Mirror's Edge. I actually have a post-platinum review dropping tomorrow, so just kind of a frame of reference as to when I'm recording this now. But this review comes out tomorrow for the Mirror's Edge Platinum Trophy. I think if you end up watching that and you're checking out this video as well, you'll know that this is one of the hardest platinum trophies I've ever gone for. Mirror's Edge is a Satan's Butthole tier list for sure. The story mode playthrough is pretty straightforward. Getting all the collectibles, pretty straightforward. The hard mode playthrough is tough but fair, but the real challenge comes from the speedrun challenges and the time trial challenges. That is where the difficulty ratchets up from something like brutal to nightmare fuel to Satan's Butthole level. And yeah, Mirror's Edge is one of the hardest platinum trophies I've gone for. Easily one of the hardest. It's also one of the most rewarding for me personally. It was something that I, again, like Gungeon, never thought I was going to get. And for some reason, no idea, I was faced with just only my PlayStation 3 for a couple of weeks, and this platinum, I think this trophy list percentage was at like 65%, and it drove me nuts that it was more than 50 for a game that I enjoyed. And so I kind of just like tunnel visioned on this game and got the platinum trophy. But I don't know what it was. This game is pretty challenging, but again, it is one of my favorite platinum trophies that I have in my collection, and it's something that I would never do again, but I'm very happy that I have the Mirror's Edge Platinum Trophy. One of the hardest in my opinion. Next here is the Demon's Souls remake on PS5, and this is going to go into brutal actually. So I think I've mentioned this on a couple of videos. Demon's Souls is one of the easiest of the Soulsborne games. It is the first of the Soulsborne games. And compared to the PS3 trophy list for Demon's Souls, this one is way easier. I think the PS5 Demon's Souls remake trophy list is a lot easier. The PS3 version, you have to like fortify a bunch of weapons using different materials, so that's more like grinding for materials and resources and things like that. So it's a little bit more challenging to kind of get those criteria to be met. This is just straightforward though. You beat all the bosses, get the worlds to white world tendency, I think black world tendency, and that can be tricky, right? Because you have to make sure that you don't die in human form. You have to be in soul form every time you go into the individual levels of this game in order to prevent your tendencies from shifting. And I think the concept of the world tendencies is handled a lot better in this game. It's very easy to see like what your world tendencies are in the remake as opposed to the original game. And there's just a lot more just resources and helpful tips and advice that you can kind of look for when it comes to how do you maintain the world tendencies to get certain rings and certain armor set that you need for the platinum trophy as well. The only trophy that was really tricky was the one where you have to invade someone else's world and kill that player as an invader. The problem was that when I started doing this, the game was it's already been out for like 4 or 5 months. And so what I actually had to do was I had to reach out to my good friend, Daniel, and he was like, yeah, I'll help you get that. And so we hopped on a server together, and he helped me, get my remaining trophy that I need to get the platinum. So it may be harder and harder and harder to get this platinum trophy just because there's less activity on the servers. But overall, again, this is pretty brutal. It's pretty challenging. And I'm really happy that I got the platinum trophy though. Demon's Souls is one of my favorite games of all time, so super happy to have this one as well. All right, guys, next here on the list is Elden Ring, and I'm actually going to do one thing real quick. I'm going to move Demon's Souls over, and I'm going to move Dead Space over as well. I'm going to put Elden Ring at the very top here of the brutal tier, followed by Demon's Souls, and then followed by Dead Space, just so that the actual ranking within this tier is a little bit more accurate. Elden Ring is way harder than Demon's Souls for sure, but the fact of the matter is that you can, in Elden Ring, you can tackle anything you want in any order you want because it's open world, as opposed to Demon's Souls. If you're stuck on like one section of Demon's Souls, you're kind of just stuck until you get better and figure out patterns through the bosses. So that is one, I guess, difference between the overall difficulty, right? But Elden Ring is really amazing. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And again, another great, I'm happy that I have this in my trophy list. But it's brutal. It's challenging. It'll kick your butt for sure. Margit kicked my ass like 10, 15, 20 times early on in the game. And I was so stubborn. I didn't want to go and explore the rest of the world. I wanted to beat Margit before I started doing anything else. This is definitely a brutal trophy list, just completing the game, having experienced all the various endings to the game. But the main difficulty, right, is the game itself, beating all the bosses, seeing everything you need to see. And for that reason, it is very brutal, but it is very challenging and rewarding at the same time. It's one of those types of games. So I'm very happy with Elden Ring, but it belongs in the brutal category for me personally. Next here is Overwatch. Satan's Butthole, baby. So Overwatch is another contender here for one of the hardest platinum trophies that I've ever gotten. And, now that it's known as Overwatch 2, right? the Platinum Trophy, or the trophy list, I should say, is pretty much the exact same as it was for Overwatch 1, but it might be even harder to get this Platinum Trophy now. It still has like a 0.1% completion rate by like the community. It's a very small number. Overwatch is a Satan's Butthole tier list, difficulty. It is one of the hardest Platinum Trophies as well. And again, it's an online, hero shooter game, so most of the trophies are luck-based on the lobbies that you get, the people that you play with, and it's all online trophies, right? And I know like a lot of people in the community hate online trophies, and I understand why now. I logged hundreds of hours into Overwatch, and at first, I was just playing the game. I wasn't even trying to get the Platinum Trophy. But when it was like insanely difficult. And it's one of those things where I have like the video capture footage for when I got the Platinum Trophy, because I was just playing a quick play game. I was just casually playing Overwatch at that point. I really was done with the game. I was waiting for Overwatch 2 to come out, and I'm really glad that I got the Platinum before Overwatch 2 came out, because like I said, I think it's way harder to get the Platinum Trophy because certain heroes in Overwatch 2 are kind of like, they're not used because the meta just doesn't support their use cases anymore. Like, they have no versatility, they have no survivability in fights, and so certain trophies for certain heroes, if you play them in lobbies, you'll just get your ass kicked. And so Overwatch is 100% one of the hardest Platinum Trophies that I've ever gone for. It is, like a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, very difficult. But again, I'm super happy I have this one, and I haven't touched Overwatch in like months. I haven't played Overwatch 2 in a while, and it's just one of those things where like I've had my time with Overwatch, I enjoyed it, and now I can say that I have the Platinum Trophy and think about it in that sense. Next here is a surprising one. This is actually Kena Bridge of Spirits, and I'm actually going to stick Kena Bridge of Spirits in Brutal. Now, the interesting thing here is I could have easily put Kena in the Betrayal. Like, it's one of those deceptively, hard Platinum Trophies, I think, like based off of the aesthetic, based off of the look of the game, right? It's very like Pixar in its animation style. And the reason I'm putting it in Brutal, though, is because personally, I think that the controls for the combat, it's trying to be like a Souls type game, but the controls are not nearly as refined as they should be for something like this. All the other trophies are pretty easy, beating the game on the normal difficulty, just beating the game in general, right, and getting all the collectibles and things like that, beating the bosses. The main challenge is going to be beating this game on its hardest difficulty, which is actually pretty darn hard, and some of the later bosses will kick your butt time and time again, and it is very challenging. And I think most of the challenge is coming from, it's partially from the bosses and how they're designed. I think that they're actually pretty well designed. The main challenge is the parry ability is so intermittent in terms of when it actually registers the parry. And so when you're trying to, engage with a boss and parry, sometimes the parry just doesn't register, even though it clearly is showing that like it should in all the other use cases where, a parry would make sense to do. And so I think the combat is why this game belongs in the Brutal section, because again, it's not the best combat in the world, but the fact that you have to beat this game on the hardest difficulty where parrying is very important, right? It's just way harder because of the combat and because of the gaps, I think, in how the game plays. Again, I could have easily put this in the Betrayal, but I think for me personally, it just kind of hurt me a little bit more than I expected it to. So I'm going to stick it in the Betrayal, or I'm going to stick it in Brutal for right now for the tier. Next here is Returnal, and Returnal, actually, I think I'm going to stick it in Nightmare Fuel. This is a bullet hell roguelike type game, and the reason why I'm going to stick this in Nightmare Fuel is because Returnal there's a lot of RNG based trophies, similar to Gungeon, but not quite as egregious as the Enter the Gungeon trophy list. Returnal, I think most of it, actually, I found Returnal way easier than Enter the Gungeon. I think this is a pretty accessible bullet hell game. It's challenging, but compared to the other types of games that I've played in this genre, this is one of the more doable games. And I really liked how, for me, it was more accessible. I was able to, as an example, for the first time I got this game, I think I died the first 3 runs, but then after that, I went on a run where I got to the very last boss in the run before a new section of the world gets revealed and there's other things going on. But it was a pretty long run. And one of the hardest things about this game early on was that you could not save your progress. You had to do your run in one go. Now, this is when the game launched, so things have changed since then. But when the game first came out, Housemarque was no, you just have to play the game and put your PS5 into rest mode, and you better hope to God that there wasn't a power outage or a software update or some weird internet-based issue where you will turn your PS5 back on and then your save progress would be basically gone. So that's what I had to do, guys. I had to pause my game, put my PS5 into rest mode, and then go and do my thing, and then come back and hope that nothing was corrupted, nothing was lost. And so I think the early days of Returnal's Platinum Trophy were a little bit more annoying. And the same goes for the RNG. You basically have to get all of the collectibles in the game, but they spawn at random intervals in random levels. And so you basically have to do same thing with Gungeon, same thing as the Gungeon. You have to essentially do the same levels over and over and over again and hope that the collectible that you're searching for spawns in the particular room that you need it to spawn in. This process alone took me 80 hours to get the Platinum Trophy, and for that reason it's nightmare fuel. It is something where I'm like, I hate RNG based trophies. It is so annoying. They are things that like I think about and I'm like, it's like not even a luck based, it's not even a skill based thing, it's all luck. And so for that reason I think Returnal belongs in nightmare fuel. Next year is Sackboy: A Big Adventure. This is easily going to go into the Betrayal for me. This is one where again it's deceptive in the sense that like you would think it's going to be easy with, it's a Sackboy game, right? It's like a platformer, it's very cutesy, colorful. There's actually some pretty good challenge in this game, though. It almost went into tough but fair, as you know. I almost could have easily stuck it here, but I think the Betrayal makes more sense because of the type of game that I was expecting it to be, and then ended up just being way harder in certain aspects. The main like story is very fun and easy, and you play with a friend. The hardest thing I think for most people are going to be the Knitted Knight challenges. They didn't really pose too much of a challenge for me, but I am going to stick it still in the Betrayal because it is one of those deceptively harder, Platinum Trophies than you might think it is, especially if you're not big into platformers. The Knitted Knight challenges are very fun and actually my favorite part of the entire game. But if you're not great at platforming, they will test your skills, and it's super achievable, but it's going to be a little bit harder than you might have thought. Alrighty, next here on the list is Drive Club. It scrolls up, and I'm going to stick this guy into Tough but Fair. Again, this is like a racing sim / arcade racer. It's like a weird mixture of the two. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty tough, but I think if you just spend the time that you need to spend with it and perfect your racing abilities, perfect some of the tracks that you maybe struggle with, it's not too bad. This might even be like a 4 out of 10. Like, it's not too crazy, but it is tougher than some of the other stuff that I was looking at on my like complete Platinum Trophy list. And so I just decided to squeeze this guy here in Tough but Fair. Next up on the list is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Soulsborne games still. This is Bloodborne, and I'm actually going to stick Bloodborne in Nightmare Fuel as well, right in front of Returnal. I think for me it was definitely harder than Returnal was to get the Platinum Trophy, mainly because again some of Returnal's trophies, that the ones that I struggled with the most were RNG based and luck based as opposed to skill based. Whereas Bloodborne, I think, is pretty challenging through and through. It's one of the more challenging ones, I think. And the main reason why this is a Nightmare Fuel, to be honest, is it's mainly related to those the Chalice Dungeon challenges. So the Chalice Dungeons are pretty much like randomly generated dungeons, and you have like different constraints within certain dungeons. You have to complete all the dungeons in the game in order to get to the true final boss of the game, which actually is pretty challenging and pretty fun. But I think that the Chalice Dungeons on their own are the reason, it's the main reason why I'm putting this in Nightmare Fuel, in addition to the game just being naturally challenging. But this is also a really fun game. I'm super happy I have this Platinum. And yeah, I love Bloodborne. It's one of my favorite Soulsborne games, if not my favorite. Again, I need to really think about that one a little bit more. Alrighty, next year we've got another contender here for Satan's Butthole. This is Wolfenstein: The New Order. So Wolfenstein: The New Order is 100% one of the hardest Platinum trophies I've gone for. Beating this game on its hardest difficulty is no joke. I had to look up a ton of guides just to kind of get through certain encounters. This game will test your skills, and you will totally feel the pain whenever you try and get the Platinum Trophy on this one. It is brutal, it is unforgiving, and it is also one of my favorite games, though. I really loved Wolfenstein: The New Order, and I was super surprised that I enjoyed this game as much as I did. And so I think for that reason, I'm also, I'm happy I have this Platinum. It's a really great game. And, it's unfortunate that I probably won't be able to play Machine Games, the Indiana Jones game, just with the platform exclusivity and stuff like that. But I do love their stuff. They make great stuff. And so, Wolfenstein: The New Order is just one example of them making a really compelling game, but it also is one example of an incredibly hard Platinum Trophy, and I think it does belong in this tier of Satan's Butthole for sure. Okay, next tier is actually going to be a surprise. This is Little Big Planet Karting. This guy's going to go into Nightmare Fuel. There's a lot to do in Little Big Planet Karting, not only just completing online races, building your own races, and having people engage with those races and, like the tracks, play the tracks that you make. It's a lot of just grinding and grinding and grinding. It is one of my favorite games from the PlayStation 3 era. I actually really like this game, even though people kind of make comments that it is like a Mario Kart clone. I think it does enough well, and it sort of injects the Little Big Planet charm into a kart racing game. And for that reason, I think it is pretty much its own identifiable kart racer, and a good one for that. There's a lot of like cool little tools and driving mechanics that I enjoyed, but this by no means is an easy platinum trophy. And obviously now you really can't go for this platinum trophy because the servers are down. So but yeah, I think the main thing is like completing the online races, again, building stuff that people are going to race on and engage with and like, and, thumbs up and things like that. And so kind of that variability, and that's sort of just random nature with it being more of like an online experience, and sort of half of the trophy list is online based. I think that's kind of why it goes into Nightmare Fuel. It's definitely one of those ones where I look back at the trophies that I had to get for this and I'm like, wow, this is kind of harder than I thought it was, years ago. And so yeah, again, I think it does belong in Nightmare Fuel. It is a little bit more challenging than you might think. Obviously you could say then, oh, well, it goes into Betrayal. It's like, not really. I mean, it's pretty hard. I think that the trophies in karting are more difficult than Sackboy Big Adventure, for sure. Next here is another contender into Satan's butthole. This is Spec Ops: The Line. I've talked about this trophy, or this platinum, every time I do my platinum trophy collection videos. This is definitely one of the hardest platinums I've had. And this is one of the more surprising games that I've ever played, where I thought this game was going to be super generic by the number, and it was actually pretty impressive. I had a lot of fun with it. It's dark. It asks a lot of, big questions out of the player. Goes back into like agency of, when you engage with a game, right? Like, what's your overall agency as a player? It's pretty cool. And by extension, it also has a really hard platinum. And the main difficulty, I think, comes in when you have to beat this game on the hardest difficulty. You basically get gunned down like 1 or 2 shots and you're dead. And so it's really hard. It's super unforgiving in certain sections. There's a helicopter scene, which I've also talked about in all my videos. There is a helicopter sequence that I guarantee you is RNG based. Sometimes if you strafe and you weave in and out, it won't hit you, and then maybe you get hit randomly at the end of that sequence, and then if you do the same exact thing on your subsequent run, you'll just die immediately. So I think the hardest difficulty, beating the game on the hardest difficulty, I should say, is where the challenge comes in, and it easily is among these other difficult platinums in this tier list. Next up here is Dishonored. Actually, I'm going to put Dishonored in the Betrayal just because I thought it was going to be a little bit easier to get some of the platinum trophy, or some of the trophies, I should say. And it wasn't. It was still pretty challenging. It could easily go into like tough but fair, but I think because of some of the other trophies in this trophy list, it ends up going into Betrayal. Beating the game without killing anybody, in stealth mode. Like, there's a lot of hard trophies that it asks out of the player. Not like too difficult or like unreasonable. It's just like there's a handful of trophies that are pretty challenging, and will make you work for the platinum. But it is a very fun game and totally worth your time. 100% love Dishonored. Next here is Knack. And I'm actually going to stick Knack at the very front of this list here in the Betrayal. Maybe followed by Sackboy, and then maybe like Uncharted, I think makes the most sense. So I'm just going to shift some things around here just ever so slightly, so we have a more updated ordering here for the Betrayal tier list. But yeah, dude, I think Knack is one of those. This is kind of why this column exists. This is why this row exists here, the Betrayal. Knack is one of those games where you would think it is like gotta be super easy. It's a kid's game. How hard could it really be? And surprisingly, the hard difficulty for this game is kind of challenging. I was a little surprised by how often I died playing the hard difficulty on Knack. The other reason why I think it belongs here is because, again, for some stupid reason, the collectibles in this game are random. So if you go to one of the areas where there's like a chest on a level, it'll give you a random collectible. It won't give you just like a hard-coded collectible for that level. It's all random. So either way, you have to do 2 playthroughs because you may not get all the collectibles that you need in one playthrough because it's all randomized, which is the dumbest thing, again, I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's kind of why I think this goes in the Betrayal. There's just some stupid stuff in here. And then there's also that hard difficulty playthrough that will be kind of challenging. Next up here is BioShock Infinite. I'm actually going to stick BioShock Infinite into, I'm going to stick it in tough but fair. I think it is pretty challenging, and it's pretty rewarding as well. The hard, playing the game on the hardest difficulty with certain parameters being set, like, it's super challenging. The last, like, airship fight is really hard. I think aside from that, everything else is pretty doable. Look up a guide for the collectibles and the miscellaneous trophies. And again, I think, the most challenging part is the hardest difficulty playthrough, but more specifically, the airship fight at the end of the game is going to definitely be a challenge, but it is totally doable. It is pretty fair with what it asks you to do otherwise. Alrighty, we only have a couple here left, and this next one here is Solar Ash. By the way, this is an incredible game, and not many people have played it or talked about it. This is from Heart Machine. This is from the studio that did Hyper Light Drifter. This is an amazing game. I love this game so much. And honestly, I'm going to stick this one in Brutal. Now, Solar Ash, again, it's an incredible game. I really love this game and I wish more people would play it. But the reason why this actually goes into Brutal is because there are some speedrun aspects of this game. So it's sort of like Shadow of the Colossus, but like a lot faster. And so essentially what you have to do for some of these trophies is beat the game on the hardest difficulty, which greatly skews some of the boss fights. So they're basically, boss fights are harder. If you get hit once during that entire boss fight, you have to restart the entire boss fight. And then there's also speedrun mode where you have to beat the game as fast as you can. And I know in some cases, a lot of people don't love to do speedrun challenges, which can kind of contribute to the difficulty. But I think the real reason why it's in Brutal is because it asks for the speedrun challenge, but also because beating the game on the hardest difficulty, it really does test your ability to react quickly enough. Like some of the reaction times or some of the challenges that you have to do within the main game are like lessened. Like the time in which you have to complete those challenges are a little bit less. And so I think the hard difficulty playthrough is pretty challenging. It will kick your butt a little bit, but then also you have to be doing the speedrun challenge, which requires you, right, to kind of just know exactly where you're going and get there fast enough. So there's two or three trophies that will kind of pose a challenge. It is super fun though, and I love this game. I think that it's brutal, but like it's some of the most fun I've had getting a platinum trophy in a long time, to be honest. Alrighty, next here on the list is Little Big Planet 2. Honestly, I'm debating if I want to stick it in Nightmare Fuel or Brutal, but actually, this might be a little controversial. Boom, this is the Nightmare Fuel row. This Little Big Planet 2 Platinum, this is actually pretty hard. This is hard just because of the fact that you have to do a lot of you have to create a lot of levels. People have to engage with those levels. They have to like them, play them. And there's just a lot of stuff. Again, it's more online based with some of the trophies. And so there's a lot of stuff out of your control, right? You have to hope that people find your levels, engage with them, play them, recommend them to other people, share them. It's like a lot of stuff, again, that's out of your control, and there's more online-based trophies to this one. And that's kind of why I think it's harder than Bloodborne. Bloodborne, it's pretty much just play the game and be good and, beat the game, right? But the Little Big Planet 2 is like, yeah, beat the game, get all the collectibles, like that stuff's super easy. But then you have like 10 to 15 trophies that are like online trophies that you really have to work for. And again, a lot of them are like creating your own levels and sharing them and getting the user engagement that you need to get some of the more, gold, higher tier trophies essentially in the trophy list. So, I mean, I totally stand by this. I think Little Big Planet 2 is like an 8 out of 10 Nightmare Fuel level. It's pretty hard. And if you look at the trophy list, yeah, it's not like a cakewalk. It's not a walk in the park. So I think it belongs here. I think it belongs in Nightmare Fuel, to be honest. Alrighty, everybody. So we've made it here to the last game. This is Hotline Miami. Now, Hotline Miami could have easily gone. I think it could easily go in the Betrayal, to be honest. It actually might go in the Betrayal, and I'm gonna move it up. I think like maybe it definitely is more challenging, I think, than some of these games. I'm actually gonna move this around a little bit here. I'm gonna shift everything down one by one. I think I'm gonna put Hotline Miami as maybe like the most Betrayal one. You know what? No, I'm gonna stick Knack as number 1 here. When it comes to like the reason why this row exists, Knack is the reason why this row exists. It was a platinum trophy I thought was gonna be way easier than it was, and it ended up being pretty challenging. Hotline Miami could easily go into this tough but fair category. Like it's hard, right? But like it is totally doable. It'll teach you the ins and outs of the game and will sort of give you an understanding of how you need to progress in order to get higher and higher ranks and, get some of the more challenging trophies. But I think for someone I went into this game blind. I had no idea what this game was. I didn't know anything about it. I booted it up on my PS Vita, and immediately I was blown away by the soundtrack. I was like, wow, this game's pretty sick. I love the aesthetics. The music's awesome. And then like I got my butt kicked multiple times within the first few levels and was like, wow, this is kind of harder than I thought it was going to be. And so truthfully, I think Hotline Miami goes into the Betrayal mainly because, again, I went into this game super blind. I didn't know what it was. I didn't realize how challenging it actually was going to be, but it is super doable. This could easily be interchanged with the tough but fair ranking, but it's super doable. It's really fun. It's really challenging. It's one of those games where I think back and I'm like, this was such an incredible experience to have on my PlayStation Vita, and for that reason, I love it, so much. But yeah, I think it belongs in the Betrayal just because, again, didn't really know what to expect with it, but now I know. Alrighty, everybody, so that's going to do it for today's official ranking for some of the hardest platinum trophies that I've earned. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider clicking that like button. It helps a ton, and I will see you all on the next video.